Pain comes in many different ways. Sometimes it comes on gradually, like a mild but growing headache that you don't notice at first. And sometimes it comes on you suddenly, like a lightning strike, splitting your world in two. That night, at the party, my world collapsed in an instant. It was supposed to be a normal corporate event. A party where, as always, I wanted to support my wife, to show her that I was proud of her accomplishments. I brought her into this world, helped launch her career, introduced her to the right people. And in the end, I witnessed something that shattered everything I thought was unbreakable. I didn't know that her smile, which I thought was genuine, was hiding such a betrayal. I didn't know that by remaining faithful to her, I was the only one who still believed in our family. That night was the beginning of an end I couldn't have predicted. Now that it's over, I want to tell this story. Not to arouse pity or revenge, but so that maybe someone listening to it will realize how important honesty and trust got the position she had long mistake can change a life forever. She became the marketing manager, and her new manager, Mr. Hudson, seemed like a man who could inspire and support employees. She was excited, sharing her new responsibilities with me, telling me how much he appreciated her ideas. I was proud of her. We were married for 8 years, and all that time I supported her in everything. I never doubted her abilities, always believing she could do better. But as her career progressed, changes began to creep into our relationship. She started staying late at work, citing urgent projects and important meetings. I tried to be understanding, though sometimes I was plagued by doubts. We began to spend less time together. Our dinners at the same table were replaced by brief conversations before bed. One evening, when she came home later than usual, I noticed a slight smell of men's perfume. I didn't pay much attention to it. After all, she could have just walked past a coworker. But in the back of my mind, that little observation left an unpleasant residue. A few weeks later, she invited me to a corporate party organized to celebrate the achievement of the company's quarterly goals. She was in high spirits, carefully choosing her dress, constantly looking in the mirror. "Ryan, will you be there? I want you to be there. It's important to me," she said, fixing her hair. Her words sounded sincere, and I felt proud that my wife wanted me to be a part of her professional world. Things were going well at the party. We talked with her coworkers, laughed, and reminisced about funny moments from her work. Emily seemed happy, and that calmed my suspicions a little, but then Mr. Hudson showed up. He was a tall, confident man with an easy smile. As he approached us, I felt Emily tense up. "Ryan, this is David, my boss," she introduced him to me. We exchanged a handshake, but I sensed something in his gaze that I couldn't explain. His eyes lingered on Emily longer than they did on me. "You should be proud of your wife," he said. "She's a real star in our department." I nodded, agreeing, but something about his words struck me as cloying. The evening went on, but something inside of me began to worry. I stood off to the side with a glass of wine, watching Emily. She was laughing, her eyes sparkling, and her hand lightly touched Mr. Hudson's shoulder as he told something funny. This was completely unlike my wife. Emily always kept her distance with her coworkers, trying to convince myself that it was just my fantasies. I approached one of her coworkers whom I knew from past encounters. Thomas, a young guy from the analytics department, was always talkative and friendly. "Thomas, how are you this evening?" I asked, trying to hide my anxiety. "Oh, it's great, Mr. Ryan. We rarely see Emily so relaxed. Usually she's all work, but today she's shining," he replied, glancing in my wife's direction. Those words only made me more anxious. I went back to the table where Emily was sitting, but she was no longer there. "Where is Emily?" I asked one of her coworkers who was sitting nearby. "Oh, I think she went outside with Mr. Hudson," she replied without even looking at me. My heart raced. Trying not to attract attention, I headed for the exit. On the terrace, lit by the dim lanterns, I saw them. They were standing in the far corner, leaning slightly toward each other. Mr. Hudson was saying something, and Emily, arms crossed, was listening to him with full attention. I froze, unable to move from my seat. Their postures, their facial expressions, it all seemed so intimate that it was like something shivered inside me. I stepped back, trying to catch my breath. "Are you looking for something, Ryan?" Thomas's voice came from behind me. I turned around and tried to smile. "Nah, just thought I'd vent." Thomas nodded, but his gaze was attentive, like he realized something, an unpleasant truth. Back inside, I decided to check her cell phone. Usually it was always in her purse, but this time I found it on the table among the glasses. I knew full well that it was wrong, but something inside me was telling me that I had to do it. I opened her messages. Among the correspondence with colleagues, I noticed a chat with Mr. Hudson. Their dialogues started out as work-related, but gradually became more personal. Recent messages included phrases like, "You were great at today's meeting. Looking forward to our next dinner. Thanks, David. I'm looking forward to it, too. I hope Ryan doesn't suspect anything." My heart clenched. Those words, written in my wife's hand, were like a knife stabbing into my chest. I slammed her phone shut, feeling anger and despair overwhelm me. I wanted to storm onto the terrace, to demand an explanation, but I held back. This wasn't the place or the time. I decided to wait until we got home. When we got home, I tried to talk to her calmly, but she seemed like she was on another planet. "Did you have a good night?" I asked, hoping her answer would make a difference. "Oh, yes, it was wonderful. David is a wonderful leader. I'm so glad we have that kind of team relationship," she replied with a smile that suddenly seemed foreign to me. I didn't say anything back. That night, when she fell asleep, I couldn't sleep a wink. Scenes flashed through my mind, her messages, her laughter with this man. The next morning I decided not to go to work. I waited for a moment to talk to her. As she was about to leave, I suddenly said, "Emily, stay. We need to talk." She turned around, her face tense. "About what?" "About what's going on between you and David." Her eyes widened, but she quickly pulled herself together. "What are you, jealous?" "Ryan, this is ridiculous. He's my boss, that's all." But her trembling voice gave her away. I stepped closer, holding her phone in my hands, then explained these texts. "Or the way you're spending time with him at dinners." Emily went pale. "You went through my phone?" She screamed, "And you betrayed our marriage." I shouted back. The conversation turned into a screaming match. She was crying, making excuses, saying it was a mistake, that she didn't know how to get out of this situation. "Ryan, I love you, I really do. It doesn't mean anything." "Doesn't mean anything? Then why were you smiling at him the way you haven't smiled at me in a long time?" Those words silenced her. I left the house that day, leaving her with her guilt and her lies. After our conversation that night, I couldn't go back to my normal life. My head was filled with thoughts that, like an endless whirlpool, pulled me deeper and deeper into the abyss. Why had she done it? When did it all go wrong? These questions plagued me as I replayed the moments of our life together. I tried to remember when the crack first appeared between us. When we were first married, everything seemed perfect. Emily was the woman who inspired me to move forward. I remember planning our future together, picking out furniture for our first home, discussing the children we wanted to have. I always felt her support. When I was having difficulties at work, she would cook dinner and say, "You'll get through this, Ryan. You always find a way." And I believed her, but in the last couple years, something changed. We started having less heart-to-heart conversations. Emily spent more and more time at work, and I found myself sitting alone on the couch in front of the TV more and more often. I'd put it down to stress, to our busyness, but now I realized the problem was deeper than that. These memories didn't bring comfort. On the contrary, they only made the pain worse. I stared at her phone, which lay on the kitchen table. There was a struggle inside me. On the one hand, I wanted to open her correspondence again and find proof so that there would be no more doubts. On the other hand, I didn't want to go deeper into this abyss of betrayal. I sat down at the table, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Emily appeared in the kitchen as if nothing had happened. She looked flawless, perfectly styled hair, light makeup, a white blouse that emphasized her sophistication. "You're not going to work?" she asked, pouring herself a coffee. Her voice was calm, but I noticed her gaze avoiding mine. "No, I decided to stay home. I have some business to take care of," I replied, trying not to look her in the eye. She nodded, took a couple sips of coffee, and walked out of the kitchen. After she left, I picked up her phone again. I couldn't just sit around and wait for the truth to come out on its own. I delved into her correspondence with David, reading every message. They were discreet, but it wasn't just work intimacy that read between the lines. "You looked amazing today," he wrote. "Thank you, David. You always make me feel special," she replied. Those words sounded like a taunt. I thought back to the last time I'd heard something like that from her and couldn't remember. I decided not to stop. Soon found some old messages where they were discussing meeting outside the office. "Are you sure Ryan won't suspect anything?" he asked in one of the messages. "Don't worry about it. He's all about his work," she replied. Looking back now, I began to realize that some moments that I had previously thought were insignificant were actually signs. I remembered one day when Emily came home later than usual, citing a delay at the office. She was distracted, but she answered my questions with such confidence that I didn't even think to question it. "We had a meeting with investors. It got delayed, but I made it in time for dinner," she said, kissing me on the cheek. I took it as truth at the time. Why should I have doubted my wife? Now those scenes were popping up in my head like someone had turned on a movie I didn't want to watch. I realized that I had to gather more evidence before charging her. A strange feeling came over me, a mixture of anger, fear, and frustration. I decided to install an app on her phone to monitor her correspondence. This decision didn't come easily to me, but I knew I wouldn't be able to find peace otherwise. Over the next few days, I watched her with a new wariness. Her every gesture, her every word, seemed suspicious to me. She began to notice my coldness and tried to talk. "Ryan, are you okay? You seem kind of distant," she asked one night. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired," I replied, trying not to give away my emotions. A week later, there was a company anniversary party. Emily insisted that I come along with her. "You know how important it is to show up to these events," she said, convincing me. When we arrived, I felt the atmosphere of tension grow even stronger. Emily was radiant, chatting with her coworkers, laughing as if nothing had happened. At one point I noticed her and David standing together again. They were talking about something, and then he put his hand on her back like it was something natural. My anger reached its limit. I couldn't hold back any longer. I walked over to them, ignoring the stares from the other guests. "Emily, can we talk in private?" I asked, trying to remain calm. She turned to me, her face pale. "Of course, Ryan. Is something wrong?" We walked out onto the terrace. I closed the door and finally spoke out everything that had been building up inside. "You think I can't see anything? That I'm a blind idiot?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Ryan, I don't know what you mean. Stop lying, Emily. I've seen your texts. I know you're cheating on me." She was silent, her face expressing a mixture of shock and guilt. "How could you? After all we've been through together." Her tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't say anything. At that moment, I realized that our marriage would never be the same. My heart pounded as we stood on the terrace as if this moment had lasted forever. Emily was silent, her eyes avoiding meeting mine. In that moment, the silence seemed deafening, and the night around us seemed cold and soulless. "Aren't you going to say anything to me?" I asked, barely restraining my voice from snapping. Her shoulders slumped, and then she sighed heavily, like she was about to confess something. "Ryan. It's not what you think," she began, but her voice was quiet and shaky. That phrase seemed to only fuel the fire inside of me. "Not what I think?" I almost shouted. "Then explain what those messages are with your boss. Explain why he's acting like you're a couple with him." She looked at me with desperation in her eyes, but couldn't find the words. I could see her bottom lip trembling as she clenched her hands into fists. Trying to hold back the tears, you think I haven't noticed? I continued, no longer hiding my anger. You think I haven't seen you change? The way you pull away from me. My memories came flooding back. I remembered how one day, a few months ago, she came home from an evening out with her coworkers. Her smile was bright, her eyes shining with some strange light that I couldn't understand. How did it go? I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. Great, she replied, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek and heading for the shower. Her phone was left on the kitchen table, and while I wasn't a person who went through other people's stuff, something made me pick it up. I saw a notification from David. I hope you made it home without adventure. You were great today. I didn't say anything at the time. I wrote it off as professional flirting or just an unfortunate expression. But now those little things were starting to add up. I trusted you, Emily. I always believed we were a team. And now I realize it was all a lie. Her tears finally broke through and she let out a surrendered sob. Ryan, it was just one time, she whispered. Those words hit me harder than I could have imagined. One time. Does she really think that somehow alleviates her guilt? One time. I echoed. And that's supposed to make me feel better. She tried to grab my hand, but I recoiled. You have no idea how much it hurts, she continued. I never meant for it to go this far. I felt lost. Those words elicited a bitter laugh from me. Lost? And what, your boss helped you find yourself? I stared at her, trying to find some sincerity in her words, but all I saw was fear and guilt. A storm was raging inside of me. I loved her with all my heart. I had built our life. Hoped for a future where we would be happy, and now it was all ruined. I tried to figure out where I went wrong. Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention to her. Maybe I'd been too busy working, but then another thought broke through the chaos. Why should I blame myself? I've always been there for her. I've always supported her. And she chose betrayal. I want to know everything, I finally said, feeling my anger turn to cold indifference. Every detail. When did it start? How far it's gone? Her eyes widened and she shook her head. Ryan, this isn't going to change anything. I'm begging you, let's just what? I interrupted. Just forget it. Pretend it never happened. Do you really think I can live with that? She lowered her head, her shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. Okay, she said quietly. It started a few months ago. He was so attentive. I felt valued, that I was admired. Those words only made my pain worse. I remembered how I tried to do everything for her, making her breakfasts, bringing her coffee in bed, offering to spend weekends together. But apparently it wasn't enough, and you've decided that your boss's admiration is more important than our family? She didn't answer. I stepped away from her, trying to cope with the rush of emotions. My hands were shaking, and my mind was spinning with only one thing: what to do now. I looked out at the lights of the city at night, and I felt a sudden determination stirring in my chest. I couldn't be a victim anymore. You know what, Emily? I said, turning to her. I'm giving you a chance. Tomorrow you're going to tell me the whole truth. Down to the last detail. And if you don't, you'll lose everything. Her eyes widened with fear, but she didn't say a word. I walked off the terrace, leaving her alone in the dark. A plan had already matured inside me, but I knew I'd have to go through hell before I could realize it. I couldn't sleep. Even when I left the terrace and closed the bedroom door behind me, the storm in my head wouldn't subside. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor as if all the answers could be found there. My heart was shattering into 1,000 pieces, and my mind was trying to put them back together, creating a picture of what had happened. Every word Emily said rang in my ears like an echo. It was just one time. I felt lost. She said it as if making excuses, as if her act could be explained. But the explanation didn't bring relief. I remembered the day I'd first met Emily. It was a party at my friend's house, where everything was buzzing with life, laughter, an endless conversation. But she was the one who immediately caught my attention. Her light laughter, sincere and melodic, made me forget everything. She was standing at the bar, talking to a friend, and she looked like a person completely immersed in the moment. "Hi," I said, working up the courage. "You seem to know how to make this evening unforgettable." She smiled, and her eyes flashed with interest. "Do you?" she asked, bowing her head coquettishly. "Are you ready to join in?" That ease and energy drew me in. We spent the evening talking, laughing until we cried, and then strolling the night streets, sharing our dreams and hopes. Since then, I have always considered her my home. She was my support, my inspiration, the person I wanted to become a better person for. And now that home was destroyed, I got out of bed and headed for the window. The night street seemed to be a silent witness to my pain. The light from the street lamps cast shadows on the wall, and those shadows seemed to play out the scene of my collapse. "Why?" I whispered to myself. I remembered all the moments when I had tried my best for her. I remembered the days I'd stayed late at work to earn money for our trips, how I'd prepared surprises for her birthdays, how I'd supported her through the hard times. And now it turned out that it wasn't enough. One day, a few weeks ago, we were having dinner at our favorite restaurant. Emily seemed distant, her gaze constantly slipping away, and she answered questions with one-word answers. "Is something wrong?" I asked, trying to break through her wall. "No, just tired," she replied, smiling, but her smile was strained. I chalked it up to stress at the time. Work, commitments, our life, all of it could have been weighing on her. But now I realized it was more than that. Her phone was on the desk then, and I noticed how she quickly put it away when the notification came in. It was from her boss. "David, why is he texting you at a time like this?" I asked, trying to sound innocent. "Oh, it's just work," she replied, a little too quickly. Now, standing at the window, I thought about how blind I had been. I saw the signs, but I didn't want to believe them. I loved her too much to allow the thought that she might have betrayed me. "You trusted her too much," I told myself. "You built your life around her, and she found someone else." I clenched my fists, feeling the anger slowly replace the pain. I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't let her ruin what we'd built together and get out of it with impunity. I walked back into the living room where I'd left her phone. It was still on the table. My heart hammered harder as I picked it up. I knew it was wrong, but I needed answers. The password was simple: her birthday. I unlocked my phone and started searching. Messages, pictures, emails, it was all in my hands now, and lo and behold, I found what I was looking for. The correspondence with David. Her words. His responses. There were dates, plans, memories of time spent together. "How could you?" I whispered, feeling the world around me crumble, but something inside me compelled me to keep reading. There were not only private messages, but hints of something more. Their communication was not only about their personal relationship, but also about her work. I began to realize that all of this was more than just an affair. Sitting at the window, I couldn't take my eyes off the cold light of the night city. My hands trembled as I clutched her phone, which now felt as heavy as a rock. It held not just information, but a whole world that existed behind me. I could feel the adrenaline pulsing through my veins, replacing apathy with anger. I opened the correspondence again. The lines of text felt like they were burning my eyes. "Tonight was amazing. You always make me feel special. Looking forward to our next meeting. You understand me better than anyone." The words were like knife strokes, each one leaving a deep wound. My Emily, the woman I loved with all my heart, hadn't spoken those words to me. I remembered our first anniversary. We had traveled to the mountains, taking a small cabin overlooking the lake. Emily was cooking dinner at the time, and I was sitting on the porch admiring the sunset. She came out to me, covered in my old sweater, and served me a glass of wine. "Why do you love me?" she asked suddenly, sitting down next to me. I laughed, startled by the suddenness of her question. "Do you want a short answer or a full list?" She smiled and I felt my heart overflow with warmth. I love the way you laugh, even when my jokes are terrible. I love how you cover only yourself with a blanket and I wake up, frozen but still happy. She blushed then, hiding her face in my shoulder. I love you, too, she whispered softly. It had been so long ago, and yet it seemed like yesterday. How could this woman who had looked at me so tenderly come from this woman who had betrayed me so cruelly? I shifted my gaze to the screen again. The correspondence wasn't just flirting and tender words, but details of meetings. They discussed the hotel, the restaurant, even her work trips, which turned out not to be work trips at all. I felt the anger building. Those moments when she told me she was late for work or leaving to meet with clients were now turning out to be lies. I thought about how I'd believed every word she'd said, how I'd supported her through the hard days. You're just an idiot, Jake, I whispered, to myself, but there was another thing that troubled me more than anything else. David wasn't just her boss. He was someone I'd once protected. When Emily first joined the company, she often talked about her boss. David was smart, charismatic, and, she said, someone who supported her professional development. One day she invited me to a corporate event. It was a wonderful evening full of laughter and getting to know her coworkers. It was then that I first met David. Tall, confident, with an easy smile, he came up to me to shake my hand. You must be Jake. Emily and I have talked about you a lot. It's nice to finally meet you. Thanks, David. Emily's been talking a lot about you too. Glad she found such a great team. At the time, I genuinely thought he was a man who appreciated my wife for her professionalism. But now, reading his messages, I saw a different David, the man who had destroyed my home. Anger, pain, despair, all intertwined inside me, forming a tangle that was impossible to untangle. I asked myself a million questions. Why did she do it? Was I not good enough? Didn't she see how hard I tried? I felt tears coming to my eyes, but I didn't want to cry. Not because of her. Not because of the man who betrayed me. Instead, I reread her correspondence over and over again, staring at the pictures, trying to find any hint that none of it was true, but the truth was too obvious. I was about to put my phone away when I noticed another folder of photos. There were pictures from events I'd never been to. Emily was standing next to David, smiling the way she'd smiled at me before. In one of the pictures, she was holding a glass of wine and he had his arm around her waist, but one of the pictures hit me the hardest. It was a shot of them holding hands while sitting at a table in some restaurant. She had a look of happiness and peace on her face that I hadn't seen in a long time. I felt everything boiling up inside. Was she really that happy with him that she wasn't even trying to hide it? I sat down on the couch again, holding my phone in my hands. My head felt empty, but my heart was overflowing with desires for revenge. I couldn't just forget about it, couldn't just let it go. She'll know what betrayal means. I whispered. In that moment, I decided I was going to take action. I needed to gather more evidence to protect myself and prepare for what came next. I sat in the dark, hearing only the ticking of the clock on the wall. Time passed, but I couldn't calm down. My thoughts flitted chaotically between memories, accusations, and ideas of what to do next. What would I tell Emily? Should I make a scene with her right away? Should I wait for the right moment? But every time I tried to calm down, those same messages and pictures kept popping up in front of me. They seemed to be imprinted on my mind forever. I remembered sitting in the cafe the day we got engaged. Emily had looked at me then like I was the center of her universe. She held my hand tightly and said, Jake, I will always be there for you. We will build a life that we will remember with pride. We discussed home, children, traveling together. Emily dreamed of going to Italy to see Tuscany. She talked about the importance of sticking together no matter what. Now it all seemed like a cynical farce. The same words she'd said to me, she was probably repeating to David. I knew I couldn't act impulsively. I needed to gather more evidence so that neither she nor David would have a chance to justify themselves. I opened my laptop and started looking up information on laws and rights in the event of a divorce. I wanted to be prepared for any situation. I wasn't going to leave her with anything we had built together. I then decided to install a special app on her phone that would allow me to track her calls and texts. I hated myself for getting to this point, but realized it was the only way to find out the whole truth. Sitting in the dark, I remembered how she had started staying late at work more often. She said they had a bunch of projects piling up and she needed to help her coworkers. "You have no idea how hard it is to keep everything under control," she said one evening, coming home tired. I made dinner then to cheer her up a little. "Why don't you take a vacation? We could go somewhere." She shook her head. "No way right now, Jake. But thanks for caring. I love you." I believed her then. Believed her words, her tiredness. But now it seemed like an elaborate lie. I felt both victimized and complicit in this tragedy. Had I been so blind? Why hadn't I noticed these small but obvious signs? Maybe it was my own fault. Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention to her. I thought, but even if that was the case, did that give her the right to betray me? Couldn't she talk to me? Tell me she was missing something? These thoughts tormented me, bringing on bursts of anger and despair. I was interrupted by a phone call. It was my friend Michael. He was someone I could always talk to, but now I didn't know if I should tell him. I picked up the phone. "Hey, Jake. How are you?" I was silent for a few seconds, trying to gather my thoughts. "I'm fine, Michael. How are you?" "Oh, same old, same old. Listen, I was wondering if you wanted to get together this weekend. We haven't seen each other in a while." I wondered. Maybe I should talk to someone who could see it from the outside. Yeah, why not? "Let's do it on Saturday." "Great. Let's cross paths at the coffee shop on the corner." "I'll see you then." After the call, I sank back into my thoughts. Emily wasn't just my wife. She was part of my identity. We had built a life together, and I always thought our bond was unbreakable. Who will I be if she's not around? Will I be able to trust someone again? These questions echoed in my head. By morning, I knew I couldn't just sit idly by. I had to find out the whole truth, prepare myself, and decide how to move on with my life. I stood up from the couch, feeling both tired and determined at the same time. Today would start a new phase of my life, a phase in which I would no longer be a victim. The morning greeted me with faded light coming through the curtains and a heaviness on my soul. The night, full of sleepless hours and painful reflections, left me feeling empty. I sat on the bed for a long time, staring at one point. Emily had already left for work, leaving behind her distinctive perfume, which now seemed suffocating. I glanced at my phone, checking the app I'd installed on her device. My heart twitched when I saw a notification of a new message. "Lunch at the usual time. Hope you're ready for what we talked about yesterday. Looking forward to it." It was him. David. Dry business correspondence, but the meaning was clear. They were planning to meet. My heart felt like it was in a vice, and my mind flashed with images of their secret meetings, of her smiling at him instead of me. I remembered the first time I'd met David. He'd come to our house for a barbecue we'd thrown for friends and coworkers. Emily introduced him as her new boss. "This is David, our CEO. He just moved to town and I thought it would be fun to invite him." David was charming and charismatic, the type of person who instantly disposes of you. He and Emily had joked around all evening, and I'd thought at the time that their friendship was just workplace chemistry. But now I realized how wrong I was. After that text message, I became even more alert to her behavior. Emily came home late at night, explaining it was another meeting. I watched her, the way she fixed her hair in front of the mirror, the way she avoided making eye contact with me, the way her phone was always on her, even in the bathroom. "How was the meeting?" I asked at dinner. "Oh, the usual. Nothing of interest. Just discussing strategy for the next quarter," she replied with a slight smile. But I noticed her tapping her fingers nervously on the edge of her plate. Her lies were hitting me like a hammer. I felt powerless. Every answer she gave, every excuse, became knives that she stabbed deeper into me every day, but I knew that if I exploded now, it would only make things worse. I had to act cold-blooded, gather all the evidence and make them face the truth. "What's wrong with you, Jake? You've been kind of broody lately," she asked, interrupting my thoughts. "Just a little tired at work." "But that's okay," I lied. A storm was brewing inside me, but I couldn't let her see that. I remembered our first vacation. We'd gone to the mountains and rented a small wooden cabin. There was no Wi-Fi and we were disconnected from the world. Those few days were perfect. We cooked together, walked the trails, laughed and talked about everything. Emily then said, "Jake, this is the best time of my life. I'm so glad I met you." Those words warmed my soul then, but now burned my soul with their lies. I decided I had to see their meeting with my own eyes. The next day, when she was going to the meeting again, I quietly followed her. She stopped at a small cafe in the center of town. I walked in next, trying to remain unnoticed. Emily was sitting at a table in the corner, with David across from her. They were talking quietly, but her gestures and facial expressions left no doubt. I took a few pictures on my phone to keep as proof. My heart was beating so hard that it felt like its pounding could be heard even by them. The next day, I decided to meet with Michael. He was the only one I could trust with my thoughts. We met at the very cafe where I had seen Emily with David. "What's wrong, Jake? You look terrible," he asked as soon as I sat down at the table. I told him everything. About her cheating, about my suspicions. About how I'd been following her. "Are you sure you want to keep living like this? Maybe you should just break up with her and start over." Michael asked. "I can't just walk away, Mike. She has to realize that I know, and she has to pay for it." Michael shook his head but didn't say anything more. Back at home, I began to formulate a plan. I decided that I would organize things so that she would be confronted with the truth in front of witnesses. I knew she couldn't be left alone with her lies. I checked her phone again. This time she had a text from David. "We're having a company party tomorrow. Make sure it's top-notch." A company party. This was my chance. I sat in the dark, pondering every move. My pain turned to anger and my anger turned to determination. I didn't know how tomorrow would end, but I was sure of one thing: I wouldn't let her play with me anymore. Tomorrow everything would change. The process of breaking the inner harmony that had happened to me in the last few days had turned into a brutal battle with myself. I sat in the shadows for a long time, pondering each step before making a decision. Emily kept leaving for meetings and I, quietly and discreetly, followed her every move. I didn't do it out of weakness, but to see what exactly she was hiding to me. And then, the moment came when I could no longer just watch. I had to act. The next morning, when she left the house again, leaving me alone in the apartment with my thoughts, I decided that I had to act immediately. I had one chance, and I couldn't let it slip away. Flashes of rage shot through me the moment I realized that another day in this tyranny of deceit and lies could be my last. I had to see her and, if not fully understand her motives, at least make her confess what had long ago become impossible between us. That day I kept to the shadows, unwilling to reveal my intentions. I had carefully prepared my plan. It was like a chess battle where every move had to be precisely calibrated. My phone was always at the ready and I checked every message, every call, every move she made. I left nothing to chance. I found myself back in the moment when we were just starting to be together. I remember us walking on the beach holding hands. She was smiling at me then as if that moment was her happiest. I thought our life would always be like that. I was completely committed to her and our love. I believed in her like I believed in the air I breathed, but it all seemed so far away when I was now standing on the brink of destruction. Everything had changed. I tried to remember exactly when we started to lose touch. But my attempts to bring everything to a single moment failed. It seemed to me that the betrayal began gradually, like a shadow stealthily coming up behind me. I waited for Emily to leave for the office as usual. This day was no exception. But now I was ready to face the truth. I'd been following her. At first I thought my suspiciousness was just the result of stress and frustration. But now I knew, my instincts weren't failing me. Everything that was going on around me now seemed to me to be part of a mosaic with holes in it that led to lies. I saw her messages, the look in her eyes when she left the house and the hidden excitement when she returned. I followed her to the very cafe where she met David again. This time I was ready. My steps were sure. I knew I was watching a moment that would ruin my life, but in that moment I still felt the need to go through with it. Emotions, anger, and pain consumed me, but it was all part of the process that I could no longer stop. When I entered the cafe, my eyes instantly found her among the people. She was sitting with him, with David. On Emily's face was the same smile that once belonged only to me. But it had no meaning to me now. Every gesture, every word between them seemed so natural. But to me it was like a knife in the back. I realized that my life had changed forever, and no amount of effort would bring me back to where I was before. David was saying something about an upcoming meeting with his partners, and Emily was answering him, looking around embarrassed. She looked happy. Not just happy, but free in a way. I knew that this freedom wasn't a gift from me, all I felt was pain and destruction. I had come there with a plan, but now I was having trouble figuring out how to proceed. I continued to watch them. I had a few minutes to figure out what I should do with this knowledge. But the longer I sat there, the more I felt myself tearing up. I realized I couldn't continue to sit on the sidelines. I had to walk over and confront her. But then I stopped. All this time I'd been hiding my weakness behind a mask of calmness and rationality. Now I didn't care. I had to go, to leave them, but I couldn't. Whatever happened next, I had to hear the truth. I stood up and headed towards their table, feeling my hand frantically clutching my phone in my pocket. I approached slowly, feeling a chill in my chest. But before I could take a step, Emily looked up at me. Our eyes met, and I saw the panicked realization in her gaze. She realized that I knew what had happened. When I got home, my consciousness was like a fog. I didn't know what to do. The realization that everything was a lie put a lot of pressure on me. I sat there, helpless, but my thoughts kept returning to our endless conversations and promises. They were all so empty. How could I have let this happen? I had been gullible, too gullible, and now with the whole truth in front of me, I felt betrayed and devastated. My inner struggle continued. I couldn't decide what to do, but I knew one thing: I couldn't leave it like this. Emily had to realize that I knew everything. I was facing an important choice. All I had to do was keep going despite the pain. I had to face her, to confront her with the truth, to make her feel the full weight of her actions. That moment was inevitable. And I was ready for it. Each day the situation became more and more tense. Emily continued to pretend that nothing had happened, hiding her true intentions from me. But I couldn't live with these constant lies any longer. My patience was wearing thin, and I realized I wouldn't be able to hold back much longer. The thought of her continuing to deceive me infuriated me, and I began to literally take her behavior apart, analyzing every moment. That day when I stood in front of her table at the cafe, when I saw her look of fear, I realized I couldn't pretend anymore. It was like the moment when you are shown everything you've been trying to ignore. It was a moment of truth. I remembered how we started our journey together. How we had shared dreams, how we laughed at small annoyances, how we made plans for the future. All those moments seemed so distant and insignificant against the backdrop of what I was experiencing now. How many times had I promised myself that I would never let myself get into a situation like this, but here it was, the reality I was now facing. I went back to the day Emily and I met at the university cafe. It was one of those chance encounters that become important in life. She looked so naive and open then. We were both young, with dreams and aspirations for a great future. We talked about life, what was ahead of us, our family, and how easy everything was going to be. And now, sitting here, I wondered, how did everything get so upside down? How was it that she, the one woman I trusted, had cheated on me, I began to notice that she was leaving work late more and more often. At first I thought it was just her career overload. But when I came home one day and she wasn't here again, I felt a strange unease. Why did she stay late at work so often? Why was her phone always on? But any messages she received she tended to hide. These were the very moments when I could have stopped and perhaps avoided all of this, but I continued to watch, exploring her life. It was at that moment, as I sat home alone, that I realized I couldn't wait any longer. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to settle this matter once and for all. I picked up my phone, dialing the number of her best friend, Laura. I knew she probably wouldn't say anything, but at this point I needed something. I told her that Emily was leaving work late and that I was worried about whether it might have something to do with her cheating. Are you out of your mind? I heard Laura reply. Emily isn't what you think she is. Don't you trust her? I felt my heart clench. Not because Laura was hiding something, but because I was starting to doubt myself. This was a game in which I had lost my balance. I sat for a long time, contemplating what to do next. I knew I couldn't leave it like this. I was going to find the truth, no matter how painful the process was. And despite the fear and pain, I decided to take action. Now when I think back to that moment, I realize that it was a real turning point. I decided that I needed to figure out what was going on. If she continued to hide the truth from me, then I needed to be a part of that disclosure myself. I followed her by going to the places she used to go. I decided I needed to catch her, to see her eyes when she realized I knew. The next day, as expected, she again said she would be working late. I didn't say a word, but kept my eyes on her. And when she walked into the cafe where she usually met David, I felt everything inside me go cold. I thought her confession would be the final blow, but I wasn't prepared for what I was about to see. She was with him, with David. At that moment, I was standing at the entrance, watching them. They were sitting at a table, talking, but the scary thing was, they were close. I saw David touch her arm, the way they exchanged glances. I could have said something, walked over to them, but in that moment I felt like something was holding me back. I was in too much pain, but still, I walked over. Not knowing what to say, I said, "You're waiting for me, aren't you?" Emily looked at me in surprise, then shifted her gaze to David. He stood up, saying hello to me. But I saw her face change, as she realized that everything in my life was now ruined. David drove off and she was left alone. We sat in silence. I couldn't stay silent any longer. What to do now? How do I get over it? Because despite the pain, I knew I couldn't let her leave. This was the moment when she had to see that I knew everything. In that moment, I felt something in my chest break. Like I was trying to breathe through empty space. But I knew one thing, I had to wait for her answer. When I got home, the emptiness was in the air. It wasn't silence, but something heavier. I didn't know what to do with myself. Emily had gone to the bathroom without a word, and I sat in the dark living room with my head cradled in my hands, thinking about how it had all come to this. The thought that I knew everything, that I'd seen her with him, the very man she might not have hidden her feelings with, was driving me crazy. I tried to think logically, to try to find some way out, but my mind refused to work. I saw her face, saw how nervous she was when we sat down at the table. She didn't know what I saw, didn't know that I had already realized that I wasn't going to return her love. She thought she had everything under control. She was so sure her lies wouldn't be exposed. But unlike her, I was ready for this moment. I knew I had to see her reaction, to see her lies. I was tired of fighting, tired of what I felt inside. At first I wanted to just leave this house, go somewhere else, disappear like she had once disappeared from my life. But what was I supposed to do? Confront her? Realize that our life together was a mirage? I picked up my phone, opened the messages she'd sent me over the weeks. She didn't hide her schedule. She hadn't even tried to be discreet. Everything was on the surface, and I could see that she really was with him, this man. I knew it wouldn't work if I just ignored it. I couldn't afford to live with this lie. At that moment, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of iced tea, I realized, I needed to hear her confession. It couldn't be something fleeting, I needed to know how she felt about me. We were sitting in the same kitchen, on the same table, but there was so much emptiness between us that I didn't know how to fill it. My whole life with Emily, all of our dreams and conversations, were now part of some other world. When she came out of the bathroom, I was ready. I looked her straight in the eye and told her I knew everything. "You dated him, David," I said the words, not knowing how she would react. She froze, her eyes went wide and she took a step back as if she didn't expect me to guess. And then came her reaction. She started making excuses, saying it's not what you think. But I knew those were empty words. Anything she could say wouldn't change anything. I couldn't take it anymore, and I jumped up, running down the hallway. All my worries, all the hours I had spent hoping, were now shattered in an instant. Everything I had once believed was now a lie. Emily walked over to me and started to say something, but I just interrupted her. "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you?" I said, trying not to cry, but inside I could feel everything tearing apart. We were no longer the people we used to be. Speaking quietly to myself, I tried to figure out what I needed to do. Would it be fair to just walk away and leave her in this position? But what was the point of going back to those old scraps of memories? We could no longer be the people who had once trusted each other. It was impossible. I thought about how hard it had been to come to this point. I thought back to how we met, how we started. I remembered the days when I thought this was true love, that nothing would stand in the way of our happiness. I remembered how we made plans for the future. How many times she said that our lives would be better than others. We were happy. I was sure that together with her I could go through any difficulties. But now I realized that this world was shattered. This world that she was in, that we were in, was now empty. I could see that she was beginning to lose me. But I didn't know what I was going to do. The thought of living without her seemed impossible. But also the thought of continuing to live with the woman who cheated on me also seemed intolerable. How could she do this to me? How could she sell what we had for one night, for a moment of passion with this David? I couldn't understand it. My world was in shambles now. Emily tried to say something, tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. It was impossible to trust again. I was on edge, and I needed to figure out what to do. But in that moment, I knew one thing: I had to make a choice, no matter how hard it was.